Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. I'm here today with Diana Giovinazzo,
Mhm.
and she is the author of The Woman in Red, which I found to be a fascinating book, being a history buff. So thanks, Diana. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, no, the pleasure's all mine. And I might say it was a fantastic book that I want to get into a little bit later. But first, before we do that, I'd like to learn a little bit about your Italian family and the research you've done on them.
Okay. Yeah, my family, it's been years in the making for the research on my family. I've always been fascinated by this story, and there really wasn't, we're from Sicily and Calabria. And so the Calabrian side, there really wasn't much there to go on. My grandmother's side of the family, she had just this really fascinating story where she came over. She had family, like it seemed like the whole family came over from Sicily. It was that kind of they kind of had this chain where if one person came, they kind of came in like clusters or clans.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
the way it kind of ended up happening, and that's what happened with her family. But with her, she was raised by her father, and her father used to take her over to this grave and say, "This is your mom." And she died in childbirth with your little brother or what have you. And then come to find out, after he died of cancer when she was 13. And this other woman shows up, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that woman at the grave, that's actually your aunt. I'm your real mother."
Wow.
And so her story's always been fascinating for me, and wanting to know more about that history. And then also the Giovinazzo side that comes from Calabria. We didn't really have any other cousins. There was that one, my great grandparents who came here, but there wasn't anybody beyond that we really knew. They all stem from them. And so I found that really interesting and kind of weird, because a lot of times, groups of families will come. And so I started digging into them and their story of um, why they came here, and finding things like my great grandfather's World War I draft card, and that my great grandmother was listed as an enemy alien during World War II.
Yeah.
This
I
little
ha-
5'5" grandma was listed as an enemy alien. I kept wondering, is she going to like bat the army over the head with her rolling pin? I don't know. And so it was that research into my family, and the how they came here kind of turned into, well, why what was pushing them towards leaving Italy, what was going on in Italy at the time. My educational background is in sociology and anthropology, and so I started asking those questions. And I was having a discussion with my dad, which he does not remember this discussion at all, by the way. We always laugh about it because he's like, "I nag you kids about everything all the time, and nobody listens. You're like the first one who listened to me." And he told me about Garibaldi. And he was like, "You should look into the history of Giuseppe Garibaldi. And I really think you'd like his wife, Anita." And I was like, "Well, okay, I'll check them out." And from the moment I first read her biography, I was just enthralled and just taken by Italian history of the unification and what was going on with them, that ended up leading me down this road of historical fiction.
yeah, no, that's a great story. That's almost like a movie. Um, and it's similarly with my dad's mom. I had no idea that I had any Calabrian roots at all.
Mhm.
I knew Naples, um, and what prompted me on my starting this probably about 12 years ago. My grandmother had brought back her father's, I call it a calling card. It's about the size of an index card. And on it, it says
Mhm.
Nicola Piomalo, uh, and from the Dukes of Capricotta, of course, in Italian. And it's got the little crest on it and all of that. And mom always told me that my grandmother's father was a duke or a count or some sort. But I never really knew. And she died when I was about 10 or 12, and I never thought to ask. And the fascinating part about that, I always thought, well, I might find a little something interesting with him. Um, the very first thing that popped up when I Googled his name was an Angel Fire record that had the history of the Crotchelo family, and all the descendants listed down, right? And I found that he married this Amelia Crotchelo in 1882. So the dates are right, the names are right, and I was pretty certain that
Mhm.
this was probably him. When I called my cousin who lived with my grandparents and asked her about the name, she said, "Oh yes, of course, that's Nanny's mother." And we had a saint in
Mhm.
the family. We had, there was an admiral, and she used to tell us that her grandfather was the princess, and we just thought she was a batty old lady. As it turned out, it was true.
Mhm.
Um, and you find out these things, and then then your mind starts just working and working and working and trying to
Mhm.
find out more. And so that family comes from there. He never knew this, and if
Mhm.
he did, there'd probably be no living with him. My mom comes from farmers in Torito. And obviously in Italy, they never would have cut the same corners, of course. And every time I would tell my mom something, she would say, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure." Um, so that research into your family, with the help of your dad, then led you to research Garibaldi and his story. And
Mhm.
like we
Mhm.
said earlier, I had no idea that he was in South America. I had no idea
Mhm.
that he had a South American wife. I found it all fascinating, and it's a great book with a history lesson, but it keeps your interest really, really well. What prompted you then to go down this road and write the story about Garibaldi's wife as opposed to Garibaldi?
I when it comes to Anita, her story, she kind of became this footnote in Garibaldi's history when other people wrote about her, and you can see it in some of the history books about Garibaldi. It was like footnote, he was married to Anita, or sometimes they would put blatantly wrong information
Hmm.
about her. And it was one of the really hard things I had just doing my research on Anita directly. So I thought it would be really interesting to share her story, to kind of share her side of things. She didn't really get the recognition that was due. She taught him how to guerrilla fight
Yeah,
in Italy, and she was right there in the thick of things. And I was like, okay, this is a woman whose story needs to be told. She needs to be in history books. She needs to be shared in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not a nonfiction writer. I don't like writing nonfiction. It makes me feel like I have to eat my vegetables every time I do. So fiction is really where my heart is. And so that's what made me want to write a fictional story about it. Because the thing I love about historical fiction is when we read the fiction, the history, and we read the actual accounts, we get the dates and the actual things that happen. But when you go into historical fiction, we get a sense of what things might have been like. We kind of get more of that empathy that could go with
right.
it, that feeling of what it would be like to fall in love with this man, to leave your home and go across the world with him, and to experience those losses. And so that was one of the things that really brings me into historical fiction in general.
Um, yeah, but and what I liked about it was, while it was historical fiction, um, you didn't really change facts. I know when you do an historical fiction book, you kind of have to condense things, and
Mm-hmm.
three battles may become one or something like that. But I think you stay pretty close to the actual people,
Mm-hmm.
and where they were and what they did, and things like that. So I have to ask you, Garibaldi's mother, is that like pretty accurate?
It's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. I love her. I love it when people ask me about it because I loved writing her. She was so awful, so
I know.
awful. Yeah, she from Anita's biography. The biographer had said that his mother just did not like Anita. Did not. Anita was too dark for her. You got to remember, Garibaldi was a northerner, and his family was
That's right.
northern at the time. Um, and so he didn't like how dark she was. Anita had a reputation And so, yeah, she just did not like her at all.
Well, Italian mothers don't like any woman.
They
So,
don't like any of the kids. Yeah.
no. So that doesn't matter. I mean, we know how that works,
Yeah.
The sons are the sons,
Yeah, the sons of the prize. They're the prize, and Garibaldi was her favorite. He actually had a brother and a sister that I didn't include in the story, and but he was her favorite.
So, I didn't know he went to South America. So did he basically leave Italy to go fight in South America, or did he leave because he had to leave?
He left because he had to leave. The thing about Garibaldi, I became a fan of Garibaldi in the history because Garibaldi is just such a character in and of himself. He was one of these guys who he just shot off at the mouth whenever he had an opportunity. He had this ego. He thought of himself and his destiny as just bigger than life. And so he got into trouble with the Austrians who were controlling the northern part of Italy at the time, and he was exiled. So he went from Italy to France, and he got this idea in his head that he was going to get on a French ship and cause a mutiny. And the French caught wind of this, and he got into trouble, and he had to escape the French, and he got on a ship that wound up in Brazil. And he was like, yeah, what the hell? I'll go to Brazil. I'll hang out in South America for a while and lay low. And in South America at the time, there was a really big influx of Italian immigrants. They were fleeing everything that was going on, all the unrest that was happening in Italy. And so in Brazil, they had a huge number of Italians, especially in Rio de Janeiro. And that's where he met Luigi Rossetti, and they became best friends. And even in the beginning, like Garibaldi was going under the pseudonym of Pane was his last name, and Rossetti's like, there's something odd about him. There's something weird. And then and when he started investigating him more, Garibaldi came out. He's like, yeah, I'm Garibaldi, and they became really good friends. And so it wasn't until the Ragamuffin War that he started fighting and becoming this mercenary in other countries, kind of building up his name and his reputation.
I knew that there was a large population in South America, especially in Paraguay and Uruguay, because when my wife and I guess around 30 years ago, somewhere around that, we were looking to adopt. We were considering, Paraguay, and they said, oh, that's like half German and half Italian. But I thought it was more recent. I didn't realize until I read the book that the Italians went so far back, especially there.
Yeah. They were in Argentina. I actually have some Sicilian family that wound up in Venezuela. And then also Peru. When I was in Peru in 2012, we learned how much of an Italian influence there was even in Peru.
I didn't even realize Peru had a large Italian influence.
Oh yeah, some of outside of New York and Italy, some of the best Italian food I've ever had was in Machu Picchu town and in Cusco. We went to every Italian restaurant. It was either Peruvian cuisine, like traditional Peruvian cuisine, or it was Italian cuisine. Either one of the two. That's what we had the whole time.
I was in San Francisco once, and I had to admit to the chef that the meal that I had there was some of the best Italian food I ever had. And that was heartbreaking coming from New York.
I'm originally from New York as well. And I can say San Francisco has great Italian food. I would be remiss if I didn't say Los Angeles also has amazing Italian food as well. See, this is my thing with California. People always like to slam on California because we put pineapple pizza. We have that. And they slam our pizza. But for crying out loud, we've got great Italian food here.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you do. I've been to Los Angeles a couple of times. I don't know if I ever went to yes, I did once with a friend. I went to an Italian restaurant once. So where are you from in New York?
Utica.
Oh, so upstate.
Yes.
Yeah, so how'd they wind up there?
So I'm not sure exactly how they wound up there. They came into New York City and then they somehow ended up in Utica. I don't know if it was family that brought them there or if it was just jobs. My great grandfather worked in the mills. There were a lot of
Oh, so that's
clothing
probably, yeah,
mills.
that's probably why. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, but we both came, both my families came to New York and stayed in New York. The interesting thing about my dad's family is somehow, I don't know how, because my dad's older brother and two of his older sisters were actually born in Italy.
Hmm.
Uh, his the youngest girl and my dad were born in America. And my dad, for some strange reason, was born in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, of all places.
Hmm.
And I have no idea. Nobody really knows why they were there, how they got there. All I know is that they were there through the 20s. And that's, I think, from what I gather from my cousin, they lost a lot of money in the crash. So I don't know if they
Mm.
had invested, or I know my grandfather had a business. He had an embroidery business in New York City where they made bridal
Mm.
crowns and things like that, and beadwork. So the only thing I could guess is that something happened and they, but they did wind up with a house again. The funny thing about Scotch Plains is last Memorial Day, I guess newspapers online, or one of those online newspaper things,
Mhm.
had 7 free days or 3 free days. So I said, I'm going to search for newspapers in Scotch Plains, and I found this New Jersey newspaper from 1923, from around when my dad was born until about 1929. There are the craziest little stories about my father's family. They motored to Brooklyn. My dad, on his 6th birthday, his older brother was getting engaged,
Mhm.
and my dad was dressed as a New Year's baby. And actually, obituaries for my grandfather's mother and my grandmother's father
Mhm.
were in this newspaper from Scotch Plains in the 1920s. So you never know where you're going to find
You
something.
never know.
Yeah.
Newspapers, so many people go to ancestry.com. It's like their initial thought is that's
Yeah.
where you go. For me, I found I've had far more luck going outside of ancestry.com to find documents and things. I found, Italy is now opening things up, so we're putting stuff online, so you can find stuff online with through Italy, the National Archives, and it's kind of funny because it was the research in my family that brought me to historical fiction, and it's now the skills in historical fiction that are bringing me more information on my family. Because I was talking with a friend who writes Civil War, and we were talking about names and that possible Italian names that they would use back in Civil War. And she was like, well, you could check the National Archives. Take a look at the National Archives and you could see all the stuff in the National Archives. And that's all online. And it was through the National Archives that I found my great grandmother's enemy alien card. And I
Yeah.
had a copy of it sent to me. And I had all this information. And we found the names of the family through that card that were still in Italy, at least at that time during World War II. And how many family members there were that were still back in Italy. FamilySearch.org, which is an organization through the Mormons, they have a lot of information on there and it's free for people to use. And they were able to get they have the World War II or World War I and World War II draft cards that you can pull up, that they have a connection with them, where you can connect to them.
Yeah, I've done several interviews with people from FamilySearch.org, and
Mm-hmm.
and they're great. And to your point, they are a great free resource. And I start steering people there now, because I tell
Mm-hmm.
them, if you're not sure, and if you're not that interested in finding cousins of that have the same DNA as you, or you don't want to or don't have the means to pay for it yet, or if you're not even sure you want to do this, I tell them, start at Family Search. I said, because they have a lot of great records. They're the ones who are filming the Antonati and all of that stuff. And I have a piece on that with the guy who actually does it. Uh, and his last name is Cole, and he's got this heavy Italian accent. And it's such a funny story. But they also, one of the things that they do, which is great, is they have a free consultation.
Mhm.
So you fill out a little form, and they don't necessarily research records for you, although they do find some. Uh, but they will point you in the right direction if you have a roadblock or something like that. So if you're researching a name and you can't find something, in my case, I had a roadblock with one of my great grandmothers, Deriso. She's my fifth, I think. And I couldn't find anything else about her. And they came up with the last will and testament of her uncle. And it's like 43 pages long. His name was Gaspari Deriso. And I just had it translated by a good friend in Italy. And this will is fascinating. And this man, what we learned together, this was a guy who, very strong-willed person, who wanted to control his estate generations after he passed away. And he had everything laid out. The church was going to get so much money, and that no one could inherit, although this didn't happen because they changed the laws, but that his will was no one other than someone with the last name DeRiso could inherit anything.
Interesting.
And he left he definitely wanted to leave it to a man, but there were no males at the time. Eventually, there was a male heir who was, that's what this is all about. He was trying to get the estate from my great grandmother, but he left her 100,000 ducati. And I said, well, I don't know, what's that worth, right? Well, I found out that Ducati is $150. So that was an awful lot of money in 1763.
Yeah.
So, it's, for anybody's, researching and wants to know, Family Search is really, really a super organization. And they have so much information out there. And like you said, it's basically all free.
Yeah.
The one of the persons that I interviewed, Paul Nauta, he's one of the executives there, and somebody came in when his next door neighbor sent in somebody that he knew, told him to take him to lunch. He was a Sicilian guy from Sicily, and when they were talking, Paul mentioned the church and the town that he came from, and this man told him, "I know the church and the priest. If you come to Sicily, I'm going to bring you there." And so he went, and the priest would come and lock them in the room every day. He said, "I don't have the time to stay with you, but if you don't mind being here, I could lock you in." So he locked them in the room with all the records. I'm dying to go back. We've been there once. We were supposed to go last year. I don't know if you've ever been. I'm sure.
Yeah, I was. It's been a long time since I've been there. I was actually a teenager, and we went to Naples, and I love Naples. And we were supposed to go last year, just like everybody else apparently. And it was really important for me because Anita's actually buried in Rome. She's buried at the base of her statue in Genicum Hill, and I desperately wanted to be there and be at, pay my respects to her before the book came out, but that just didn't happen. And so we're waiting. We're hoping that things might open up, but by the sounds of it, it doesn't sound like it'll happen until next year.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too now. I had a whole tour planned with Italy Rooting, who they actually part travel agent, part, I wouldn't say genealogist per se, but she actually tries to bring you back in time. And we were going to go to the Palazzo in Capricota, and I was going to meet 20 cousins that I never knew existed. And when we went 25 years ago, we went to Rome. Of course, everybody has to go to Rome. And then we stopped in Naples. We took the train, stopped in Naples, only to pick up a car to go to Sorrento. And I had no idea that Dad's family, both his parents, lived like a half a mile from the train station. So we're gonna walk there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were broken. I mean, we were hoping for September this year, but like you said,
Same here. I was hoping for September as well.
For
We were
sure.
going to originally we were just going to do Rome, and then we decided, for in the fall we were going to do Rome and then Naples because my next book comes out in January, and I spent so much time researching Naples and the Palace of Caserta that I was like, okay, I've got to go see this place in person.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
only so much you can visualize and see doing those virtual Google searches on the map, and so we were going to go there.
My fifth grade girlfriend from grammar
Mm-hmm.
school moved to Salerno 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And she said it's really tough. But you know, she loves it. I'll have to send you some of the names from my ancestors because their stemmas are all over Naples on all the
Mm.
buildings and all of that. So we'll have to have you take pictures of that. But Antonia's actually been to that palace in Caserta, and she said it's unbelievable.
It is. It is so. It's so amazing, and going into the history of it because it was when I was. So the book that I'm writing is about Maria Carolina Charlotte, and so it's set in the 18th century, and so she had such a heavy influence on that palace because it was still being built when she
Yeah.
was there. Like she couldn't even get married in the wedding in the chapel there. It was still being built. She had to get married in the theater.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and so that's where she was married, and not all of the statues were there when she was there, so things were still being built and put together, and so it was so much of her that I had to make sure that it was a major part of the story as well. And now I've got to be able to go back there. It was that book, Antoinette's Sister, was my pandemic book. I started writing it during the pandemic, and it got me through the pandemic, I should say. And yeah, now it's like, okay, now I've got to go there. Now I've got to go see all this stuff.
Well, yeah, and that's why I wanted to go because I wanted to go and walk in the footsteps of as I'm writing about these people, walk in the footsteps and see where they lived and walk down those streets because, like you said, it's not the same.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, we lived in England for 2 years, and you go into Westminster, you don't feel Westminster in a picture. You just
Mhm.
can't imagine what
Mhm.
it's really like. And the the Hotel Carcelo in Naples, that was the palazzo from one of my great grandfathers in the 1600s, and it's all been refurbished. So, again, you could go into these places that you actually knew. I mean, I love history anyway, but to actually
Mhm.
go into some place that you knew that your ancestor was there.
It's
y-
so magical. It's
Yeah,
it's it's a magical feeling. I can just imagine that, just being there and walking the same footsteps that they might have walked in. Even as a history buff, going through ruins and things of that nature, wondering what was going on. That there's this humbling kind of feeling for a
yeah,
lot of these places. I remember even when I was a teenager going to Pompeii and wandering around the ruins of Pompeii. And mind you, we were obnoxious children, so we were always hanging out around like the ruins and stuff. But it was like these were people's houses at one time. How and it's humbling to think that they're still that they aren't there anymore, but there was something there, and now you're standing where they could have stood. It's awe inspiring.
yeah. I told my wife, I said, when we go, I said, we're gonna have to find something for you to do for at least a half a day because I want to go with Cinzia to the cemetery and just walk around the cemetery and look for people. She thinks I lost my mind. Maybe I have. I don't know. Um, but this has been fascinating.
Thank you.
For anybody, you want to read a great book about Garibaldi and Anita. I should say Anita and Garibaldi. I'll say it the right way. Um, it's a great book, and you get great insight into um, Garibaldi's history in South America, which again I never knew there was a history of Garibaldi in South America.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and their love story is fascinating too. I remember you were mentioning it was possibly like you were like, oh, maybe this is a chick flick kind of
Yeah,
thing, but that's really so much of their story where they had such a passionate romance that you can't tell one part of the story without the other.
Yeah, and I think too with him, he really, treated her as an equal and a soldier,
Yeah.
which is really for that day, for that era, is really pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah, it was very progressive, and he in a lot of ways was very much a progressive person. The ideas of them were very progressive.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, thanks again. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was my
And
pleasure.
but maybe we'll meet in Naples next year.
Yes, yes. We'll have to plan on that.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.